Hey guys, I'm Garrett. I run the OCR Jester YouTube channel, which is basically a channel that just goes over highlight videos of races. In the future, I'll have GoPro footage, and also race reports, which is this video. So for this video, I'll be talking about my experience with the Killington, Vermont Ultra. That race was brutal, it was disgustingly cold, and I absolutely loved it. It was a phenomenal time. Unfortunately, I DNF'd, but I still learned a lot out of it, and I thought it was an amazing experience that I wanted to talk about in a video. Go over it mile by mile and tell you guys how I tackled it, maybe so you can do better in the race because you know how it'll pan out a little bit better, or just have a better sense of how I tackle a Spartan Ultra. So before I get into the specifics mile by mile, I have a few questions I want to answer for those of you that might not be fully aware of what a Spartan Ultra is. Spartan Ultras are just trail ultras with obstacles thrown in, and the distance is around 30 to 31 miles. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's a little less. Killington, Vermont is a brutal place, so you may be wondering why I decided to tackle that for my first Spartan Ultra. Long story short, it's not my first trail ultra, but it is my first OCR ultra. I was originally planning on doing the New Jersey Ultra, but unfortunately, before the race, I want to say like 3 months out, I sustained a pretty nasty injury that left me not able to run until I want to say May, late May, and I just couldn't. It's not fun thinking about it because it wasn't a fun time, but long story short, I couldn't do the New Jersey Ultra. I was really itching to do an Ultra. Killington was the only one that I could still do in this calendar year, so I was like, screw it, all or nothing. I'm doing Killington. So that being said, I didn't get the full year to train for Killington like most people do. If you have the opportunity to train for a full year before Killington, please do so. Those hills are brutal. You need to do lunges, stair-stepper sessions, a lot of hill repeats, include a lot of elevation and standard runs, or just have the great strength training program for your legs. It's not something to take lightly because that elevation will eat away at your time, but I'll get more into that in the mile by mile. Training for this race was a little rough considering I had an injury which kept me out from any sort of physical activity until about the end of May, but starting in July I was able to get in some running and start running again. Between July and September I got on about 50 hours worth of training, 20 runs I think, something like that, and I also got on a 50k. I also did some hill repeat sessions with about 1,500 to 2,000 feet of elevation gain per session. I think there was one that was a little under that, but it was around that point for most of the training sessions. And I believe I averaged about 6,000 feet of elevation gain per month. Next year I'll put in a lot more, but given the situation this year, it's what I was able to do, so I just went with it. Whenever a Spartan race would be in the area, I would do the longer distance on Saturday or Sunday, and then afterwards on Sunday I'd volunteer with the course sweep and scrub, which is basically just another way of getting a lap in and being on technical trails, getting used to the footing, while also taking down some course markings and picking up trash, which is a great way of getting a free race entry and not costing an arm and a leg for spending more time out on the course. Now switching to race strategy, I figured I'd need to take the full 14 hours. When I did the 50k, it took me 10 hours to cover the 30 miles, which was over an hour and a half longer than the year before when I did that race. I guess I just attribute that to lack of training since I was injured. But my nutrition during the race this time around was a lot better, and I had it nailed down, so I felt pretty confident with that for Killington. So you definitely want to get in some longer runs, nail down your nutrition, so that way you're not experimenting with stuff on Killington when you don't want that variability. Now in terms of what I would recommend for nutrition, I wouldn't recommend anything for nutrition since everyone's different, everyone has different needs for racing and all that. Some people sweat more, some people sweat less, some people have different hydration packs, so they'll put stuff in differently into their vest, along with different size drop-ins and all of that. But other people have covered this topic. There's no need to be a dead horse. Obstacle activist Neil Murphy, Fierce Gear OCR guide, or Fierce Gear OCR, something like that. They'll be linked in the description, and they all have solid guides to be able to get the most out of your nutrition on race day. And then the last strategy was, whenever possible, conserve strength. You will feel zapped at the end of 30 miles, and you want every bit of strength that you can have. For me, I knew there were some obstacles I just can't complete because I never have completed them, like Olympus. So since there was a penalty loop for that obstacle, without trying to waste a whole bunch of strength on the obstacle, I gave it a try and then just did the penalty loop. With burpees, I didn't do strict form burpees. I just did the bare minimum of chest to ground, jump up, straight back, hands above head, and basically just keep it simple and not expend too much strength. And then pre-race, preferably get there the day before. You don't want to arrive after a 5 to 7 hour drive on the day of the race. That's just ridiculous. I don't think I need to say that for you to know that. And drop off the bin preferably the day before. If you try and drop it off during race day, you have to get there even earlier, and then you don't get priority picking of where you want your bucket. Ideally for the drop-in area, you want it near the front, and you want to go in and go out in less than 5 minutes. 3 minutes even is much for some people. Because if you sit down at the very end of that drop-in area and you just have the chance to lying down, it's game over. So put it in the front, that way you don't really have much of a choice for leaving the transition area for the second lap. And then this is kind of an unconventional training tip that I took from someone else. I don't remember who it was, but I slept on an air mattress the week leading up to the race, and I absolutely hated that air mattress. It was not fun. It was super uncomfortable, but it made the hotel bed all the more comfortable. I struggle with getting a good night's sleep before the race, so I figured sleeping on an uncomfortable surface and then sleeping on something comfortable the day before the race would make it much easier to sleep, and for me at least, that was accurate. You can test it out for yourself. If you want to use that tip, you don't have to. It was just something I'd throw in because I thought it really helped with the whole pre-race nerves the night before. So the race was a fun time, but mile by mile there was simply a lot of stuff going on, so I kind of want to talk about that. At the start, it was fairly simple, standard Spartan uphill that you would expect at Killington, Vermont. There were some flats and downhill that were runnable, so I ran those. Standard obstacles, the first one of note was a barbed wire crawl. If you're doing that and you haven't heard of the strategy of flipping your vest around to put it in front of you, do that, because that way there's less on your back and you can be lower and not reach up to the barbed wire and get snagged. It just makes it a lot easier. Then if you're facing dunk wall and the rolling mud in cold weather like Killington, Vermont was this past year, be sure to have a dry bag to put stuff in so that way we can keep it with you, save some time, put it right back on, and stay warm. That extra weight of the dry bag and a hydration pack is so worth it if it's cold weather out. Then there was the swim. That was ultimately the first strike against me for the race. You could argue not training well enough was, but the swim is the first thing that really got to me. It was cold weather, like I've already stated. I had shed my sweatpants and jacket to the side to save some time with trying to warm up. Obviously, it didn't save time with going back, but you kind of had to anyways if you failed the obstacle because you have to give back the life vest. So as soon as I jumped in, my body screamed hypothermia. It wasn't fun. It was super cold, a lot colder than 2018. I remember doing it the year before, and it felt cold, but afterwards I was fine within a tenth of a mile. I felt horrible the rest of the race after that swim. Not to say I didn't enjoy the race, it just obviously zapped my strength and made it really work hard to stay warm. The swim itself was long. There was a penalty loop if you failed, which I did. Definitely getting some practice hanging from ropes. I had practice holds where your weight stays within this general realm in the sense of like how you're holding. But if you're holding ropes, it starts to like push upward, and you want to have a solid grip on something that's not within your wrist. Well, it is, but the majority of it isn't, if that makes sense. So definitely practice both kinds of holds if you're doing Killington. After that was the tire flip. In the past, I thought it was relatively easy, but then again, I was training for tire flips. This time around, I wasn't. It made it a lot harder. If you have the chance to train for tire flips, do so, even if there's a chance the obstacle won't be there, because if it is, you're kind of screwed if you can't lift that tire. I was able to get it after maybe 3 minutes of nosing around that area and just like walking back and forth, being like, how am I going to do this? But eventually I got it. Then there was a rope climb. I didn't get that, so I had to do burpees. I was hoping, so technically I'm not required to do burpees, but I was so thankful the volunteer was actually being really stingy with me, like saying you have to do all 30. I was going to do them anyways, but I was open, so I didn't expect to be asked to take my headband off and give it to the guy and then put in front of the camera. But nevertheless, it's better, in my opinion, for volunteers to be stricter than more lax. After that was the bucket carry, much easier than the year before, but still with the conditions wasn't fun. There wasn't really anything to note there, but the next thing of note was the 7-foot wall, where I actually winded myself on the obstacle. I'm so used to grabbing up like this, pulling up in a muscle-up kind of formation, pushing the wall to be under my stomach, and then like swinging a leg over and dropping down. But this time around I decided to rest as I was going like this, and I leaned against it with my stomach and winded myself. So after that, it was really hard to get nutrition down because my body didn't feel right, obviously, because who would when that would happen? And I was kind of barfing beef jerky as I was trying to eat it. Maybe too much information, but hey, this guy said it would happen anyways, so.
I can't stop! Help! There's a cliff! And your family's screaming, "Oh my God, we're burning alive! No, I can't feel my legs! In comes a meat wagon! Woo, woo, woo. And the medic gets out and says, "Oh my God." New guy's in the corner puking his guts out.
At that point in the race, it was rough, so I wasn't surprised that something like that was happening. Olympus, I just took the penalty loop. It was kind of rough trying to stay on a slick wall, and I already know I struggle with Olympus as is, so the penalty loop would be better to save strength, which is always a thing you need to consider when doing an ultra. If you know you can't do an obstacle, and you've given it a try, and you're not getting anywhere, it's better to take whatever penalty they have instead of fatigue yourself to the point where you can't do the following obstacles. After Olympus was Twister and Armor. Twister, I was doing alright. I got to the halfway point and I was like, it isn't worth it, I'm just going to do burpees. But it was cool getting to try the obstacle while wind was blowing you around. Armor wasn't too bad. It was a standard duck waddle while holding a weight under you. But the next obstacle was after some slick downhills, which were really rough, reaching 40% inclines on wet slippery surfaces. That obstacle was Bender. I've done Bender before, it scared the crap out of me, but never have I thought it was dangerous before. But this year at Killington, it felt dangerous. With it being wet, super windy, super cold, conditions were not favorable. Typically I'm able to monkey up, get to the top, do the same thing I do with walls, but a little differently. But this year, I had to like grab up onto it, get into like a Tarzan, not Tarzan, but gyro traverse sort of hold, and then realign myself, climb back up, climb over. One thing to note with that obstacle is it's much better to fall forward than backwards. If you fall forwards, you're falling over the top and you have much more spaces to grab and hang on and prevent yourself from hurting yourself. If you slip and fall backwards, you have nothing to grab onto if you fall. So it's best to get a solid grip before you flip right over the halfway point of that obstacle, and then even if you don't have a leg positioned on the thing on the other side, just flip over, let your legs slide over, and grab a spot. Then when dismounting, try and get as close as you can with your feet to the last bar, and then depending whatever height you are, whatever's comfortable for holding your body at, then what I did was I wrapped my arm around the bottom thing. I think it was, I chicken winged the bottom one, or whatever the lowest one was that I could. And then I eventually got myself to the point where I was kind of like how I got onto it, like the gyro traverse position, except this time dismounting. And I just let my legs drop and then let go with my arms. And yeah, that obstacle was not fun, wet. So I just figured to leave my tidbit of advice if you do come across it with those conditions again, because it can really eat up time trying not to kill yourself on that obstacle. Then after Bender, there was the same old slick downhill that was right before it. Super rough, taxing time. The obstacle before the Death March was pipe layer. I had accidentally hit my head on pipe layer, which triggered a mental downward spiral for me because hitting my head is how I got myself injured for New Jersey. And I was like, what happens if I'm super injured again and I can't get off this hill and I'm stuck on there, and a repeat of Hawaii with someone getting stuck on a hill. and my mind just mentally wasn't in the best place. So after pipe layer was the Death March. This was particularly rough this year because of the cold weather, wind, and rain. The year before, when it was sunny, it was fun. This year, it was just a suck fest, or in other words, a sufferfest. I remember mentally I sort of gave out around a quarter before, in other words, a quarter of the Death March before the end, so right around the top. That started the downward spiral of not moving, which meant my body wasn't producing heat, which meant I was inching closer towards hypothermia. I've had hypothermia in the past. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I know when my body's going into it, because it really messes with your head and the way you think, but think of it like the snowball being at the top of the hill. I knew my body was there and there was a potential for it to go down that path, so if I didn't keep moving, I was in trouble. Thankfully, after the Death March was some easy ATV tracks to run down, so I was able to get my body heat back up and prevent that unfortunate possibility that some people did encounter during that race. I remember just crying at the top of the Death March because mentally I was out of it because the weather was just so bad, so it's no surprise there, but the volunteer had said stack the cups as you toss them. So when I tossed it, I completely forgot to stack it and I was like, so it is what it is. Mentally, I'll know that cold weather brings me to that point, so I know I'll need to better train for that next time around. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention it because I'm not going to act like I demolished that first lap, because I didn't. It killed me emotionally. But the name's Killington, so what do you expect? The next obstacle was the box. It was alright, I needed help with it. I was in open, so that was allowed. But the next thing of note was the Ultra Loop. The downhill for this was pretty dangerous. I had talked with one of the staff members before the race who I'd also volunteered with, not in the sense that they volunteered, but I volunteered with them when I was doing the volunteer shifts I had mentioned earlier. They were saying be super careful on that downhill, and they were very much accurate with that statement. I didn't hurt myself on that downhill, but there are reports of people having broken a bone or twisted an ankle or other stuff on that downhill. Normally I wouldn't say that downhill would be a super bad problem, but with the slick conditions it was, so yeah, that definitely ate away at some time. But what ate away even more at my time was the sandbag carry at the very bottom. Some people had mapped it in Google Earth and Google Maps and stuff like that, and they said it was around half a mile. It might have been a little bit less than that, but it was around that point, and it just ate away at a lot of time. If it was a flat carry, it wouldn't have been too bad. I know my pace when carrying heavy weight is around 28-minute miles, and that's on flat ground. This was right up a steep hill, so I'm sure it was well into the hour pace mark for that carry. I had to stop several times for that, and then even crab crawl on my hips down on the downhill for that section, because I was slipping on my butt too many times. I was like, I do not want to injure myself slipping, so I'll just crab crawl it. At that point, I lost a lot of time. A lot of the people that were in front of me had taken off at that point. And mentally, I was unprepared for the next part, because I thought it was the bottom part of Bear Mountain leading back to the Beast Course. I didn't realize it goes right back up. So some people have said that that was like the third mini Death March. I didn't think it was equivalent to the Death March, but in terms of duration, it definitely did take a while, kind of like the Death March. By the end of it, I was 30 minutes away from the cutoff time, and I wasn't going to be able to finish the last 3 or 4 miles in that time frame. So instead of pushing myself and just making myself even more miserable, I decided to sit down at the end of the Ultra Loop and just reflect on the beauty of the mountain. If you aren't having fun during these races, what's the point? I reflected on some of the goals I had set for myself, like build character, finish the first lap, and stuff like that. Some of them I did finish, some of them I didn't. It just comes with the nature of attempting a race like Killington. Even though I DNF'd, not even finishing the first lap, I thought the experience was well worth it. For the most part, I'd say with the average ultra, if you don't finish the first lap, that's a really big sign you didn't train well. And I'm not going to say that wasn't accurate. I didn't train well enough for this race. But this course was also brutal, the weather was brutal, and there's actually a fair portion of open that didn't finish the first lap. So it wasn't like I was a back of the packer just wrapping up the last set of ultras that were finishing the first lap. There was a good chunk of us that didn't finish the first lap, so all the more sweet the next time we finish will be, maybe. But after the Ultra Loop, I didn't really take the course seriously. I was just playing on the obstacles, having fun. I was just walking the rest of the stuff. I wasn't running. I can't really offer any piece of advice for transition since I didn't reach there. So yeah, that sort of wraps up with what I went through. Maybe the last thing to note was, even though I DNF'd with a smile on my face, I did not have a smile repeating to people. I did not finish the first lap because every time someone passed by me, they'd be like, "Great job, Ultra, you're doing phenomenal." And then in my head, I'd be like, I feel guilty of accepting that praise or whatever because I didn't even finish the first lap. So I'd be like, thanks, but I'm still on my first lap. And then some people were like, oh, because I felt bad because it was kind of like rubbing salt into an open wound. I remember there was one Ultra that had passed by me. Some of you may know him, Scott Knowles. He does the I Am a Spartan podcast. He was kind of like, oh. And I'm sure he felt bad about that. And I remember listening on his podcast, he was like, what do you say to those people? And to me, I would have said, call me a nincompoop. I didn't train hard enough. I didn't fully know what I was getting myself into. And I was prepared mentally. I was able to handle all of it up until the top of the death march. But, yeah, it's just something funny that happened afterwards. So after DNFing the race around mile 14, or 13, mile 13, there were still 2 major climbs left. It was fun going up and down those climbs, but at that point, at the end of the last climb, I was like, I just want this race to be over. Because it already was over for me, but I was still on the course because I couldn't leave. Because you still finished the first lap. But at the sandbag area, I had the staff member cut off my timing chip, and then I just headed to the transition area to fuel up because I was feeling really depleted in energy. So I don't have anything written down on paper about post-race notes, like anything of merit. I guess one thing I'll mention is I got super sick after the race, as one would expect when you take a swim in 55-degree weather and then proceed to run for the rest of the day. So definitely pack some healthy, nutritious food for your transition area, not just for transition, but also for after the race, because you want that nutrition to be going into your body as soon as you're done, because your body goes into recovery mode really quick after stuff like this. Chocolate milk's a good option. It has a great ratio of protein to carbs and all that. Like I said, I won't go into the nutrition aspects. Other people have already covered that. East Coast Trail and Ultra Runners podcast has a great episode on nutrition. You can check that out for specifics on when you should eat after an ultra, what you should eat, and all of that. But that's pretty much all I have to say. If you've gotten this far in the video, thank you for paying attention. I'm not one that is very much experienced with this stuff of being in front of a camera. I'm generally used to being behind a camera. So lighting's off, all that. But it is what it is. If I don't make these videos, I can't get better at it, and then I feel like I'm robbing you guys of the opportunity of learning from what I've learned. Not that what I have to say is like super amazing, but personally I learned from others, and even people that made crappy quality videos I learned from because they were able to talk about their experience. So hopefully you've learned something through this video, and my thoughts are not too gibberish because I'm not used to talking in front of a camera. But nevertheless, I hope you do well with your first Spartan Ultra, whether it be Killington or whatever venue, and that you got something out of this video. If you did, be sure to leave a comment telling me what you thought. So yeah, this has been Garrett, and I will see you in a future race report.